Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the final day of this webinar organized by Women of Open Source Community Africa with the theme Open Source Contributing Beyond Codes. This webinar is organized by WOSCA, which is an initiative of Open Source Community Africa and She Code Africa with the aim to improve and strengthen inclusion and diversity in the open source ecosystem in Africa. So this webinar has been going on since 8th of this month, which was on Tuesday this week. And the purpose of this webinar is to debunk the general idea that open source contribution should be restricted to people who know how to code or people who code. So since Tuesday, we've been having several sessions. We've had 2 sessions overall, and we've had our speakers come up here to talk to us on different ways by which you can contribute to open source. On Tuesday, we had Peace Ojeme, and she talked to us about how to contribute to open source as a designer. And on Thursday, we had Edidion Asiko, and she talked to us on how to start contributing as a technical writer. So if you missed out on any of these sessions, the replays are available on this YouTube channel, so you can always go back and watch them at your convenience. All right, so welcome once again to everyone who is currently watching me in this stream. And if you were able to make it through day 1, day 2, and today being the final day, congratulations, you're the real MVPs. Thank you so much for joining us thus far and actually making it to this 3rd and final day. So today, on the discussions on how to contribute to open source even as a non-coder. So as an introduction, I'll be introducing you to what open source is, assuming this is your first time hearing about the concept, or maybe you've just forgotten what open source is generally. So open source software are those projects that have a kind of license that allows users, particularly everybody, modify or change or even reuse their code bases. So that's basically what open source softwares are. Anybody can contribute to it, anybody can modify it, anybody can change the code bases or even reuse the softwares to build a different one altogether. So today we are going to be contributing this conversation, and we have a guest right here with us. So during the session, please, if you have any questions, feel free to write them down in the comment section. The guest will be taking all your questions at the end of her talk. Our guest is the Ecosystem Community Manager, Sub-Saharan Africa at Google. She is the co-founder of Open Source Community Africa and also the founder of She Code Africa. Remember, She Code Africa is the organization that actually birthed the Women of Open Source Community Africa, which is the people actually holding this event at this moment. So we have our guest in the house, no other person but Ada Nduka Oyom. And today she's going to be talking to us on how to contribute to open source by building open source developer communities. And she's going to be telling us a lot from her experiences building developer communities, especially around open source in Africa. Welcome, Ada. Welcome, Ada Nduka Oyom, to this stream and to this webinar. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Okay.
Welcome. We can hear you clearly. Yes, we can. Thank you so much for joining us, Ada.
All right. There's going to be a bit of background noise at the back, but please permit me or please pardon me for that. And I'm going to be taking some little breaks every now and then because I'm trying to finalize on some things internally. But yes, thank you for having me. My name is Abba Nduka, and I'm excited to be here. My talk is going to be focused on communities, basically building developer communities, tips that I have learned, and anyone who's interested in building dev communities, how you can get started, and the various things that you can look out for. I'm going to be I don't have any slides. My points are all on my phone, so yeah. All right, so first things first, a bit of an introduction. My name is Adam Kaoyo, and just like Amara has introduced, I am currently the ecosystem community manager, community at for Sub-Saharan Africa with Google. I'm also the founder of Open Source Community Africa and Chicode Africa. My experience in community building has been, I think it's been over 4 to 5 years, developer community building specifically. I said community building right from my university days. Some people might know my story already, right from my university days. And since then, I've transitioned it into an actual career and other things as well. And then every now and then, you'll also find me making TikTok videos, um, detailing my experience in tech, in DevRel, and also like narrowing it down to like software engineering as well. So let's get into. Please, if at any point you have any questions or any questions in general, please feel free to share, and I'll be happy to answer. I want this to be more of an interaction and less of talk, but like I said, I have some pointers that I would like to point on and discuss on basically. Now, the first thing is, why do communities exist? I don't know if there are like people currently watching, but if you have an idea as to why you think developer communities exist, please feel free to drop it in the comment section. But I will tell you my reason as to why um, communities exist. Now, technically, when you start a role or a path in software engineering, it's pretty easy to get derailed. It's pretty easy to feel either tired, or it's pretty easy to not get that motivation to want to continue. And that's why the communities basically. You do a few things and there are no sort of people to encourage you to want to keep doing that thing. There are no sort of people to inspire you via what they're doing. There are no sort of people to push you to go further. And this is one of the very major reasons as to why communities exist. And communities also exist because it provides a platform for opportunities for you to excel in a particular field. Opportunities like career opportunities, job opportunities, financial opportunities, several types of opportunities, basically. Some people might ask, I'm coming into tech, why do I need to be a part of a community? It's as simple as, aside everything that I have just mentioned, it's as simple as things like someone just nudging you, someone checking in on you. You can't, it takes, I've forgotten the wise word that they use for this, but then you can't um, start a journey on your own and excel and expect to be at the same pace with someone who is surrounded by a support system, because communities basically act as support systems for you. So now, why would you even want to start a community? I mean, it's one thing to be part of a community, it's one thing to also want to start a community. So why should you want to even start a community? Now, there are three, sorry, please excuse me, this is my first break.
All right, please pardon the interruptions. I think our guest is caught up in between this talk and something else, so you have to pardon her. So she was talking about why you should start a community. So if you have an idea of why you think it's important to start a community and not just be a part of a community, feel free to share with us in the chat while we wait for our guest to be back. But from my end, when it comes to open source developer communities, I really think that even as someone who maybe I've never contributed to open source, maybe via codes, if I create a community and I'm able to empower others or even give others the right push to get into contributing to open source? I mean, I've already contributed, because even though I was not able to contribute to the code base, I was able to incite others, impact others, inspire others, maybe even call experts in the field to train people on how to start contributions to different open source projects. So it's one thing to be part of contributing directly to the code base, and it's still another thing to be there to impact others and incite people to start contributing to open source projects. So that's my own. I'd love to hear from you. Why do you think it's important to start developer communities around open source, or even developer communities generally in programming languages and any other part of programming? So if you have any idea, you should use the comments so I get to read it out to everyone while we wait for our guest to be back.
Yeah, sorry about the brief interruption. Like I mentioned, I'm trying to finish up a few things. So, continuing from where I stopped,
Welcome back.
I thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Welcome back.
Please let me know if you can hear me clearly.
Yes, I can. I can. Loud and clear.
All right. So, why would you want to start a developer community? Basically, when people ask the question why the communities exist, there are three things, or there are three major stakeholders to the success of a community, or to the success of the ecosystem. The first thing is there are people who build the ecosystem via the products that they build, via the things that they do, via their technical work, their intellectual work. Basically, there are also people who help fund this ecosystem with the financial resources, and there are people who create, who maintain that particular ecosystem. So when people say when people say it's one thing to want to come into tech, and it's another thing to build a community, and I don't see the essence in wanting to build a community, I don't see the essence in wanting to sustain a community, people tend to undervalue the immense action the community builders put into place to make sure that a community and an ecosystem is actually running. They tend to undervalue or undermine the impact and essence of these builders, and try to focus more on the people who are building the products, without the people who are managing these communities, without people who are bringing together this group of people who are actually building products. It's going to be a bit scattered, in the sense that when people outside the ecosystem try to come into that ecosystem, there isn't even an ecosystem existing. There, people might say an ecosystem is one that probably, as long as people who are building products, as long as the people who are sustaining with financial resources, that's all you need. But it's way more than that. You also need people to maintain that circle. You need people to create pathways that will bring in more people into that circle. You need people to create some sort of unity, some sort of platform where people who have certain interests in a particular thing, it's easy for them to come together and talk about that particular thing. So now the next thing is, what is an open source community? I mean, we've talked about why communities exist. We've also talked about why you need to start a community. But then what is an open source community? Because if you're narrowing it down to communities, there are like different type of communities. There are communities for different fields, there are communities for different products, basically. But when you bring it down to open source, what's an open source community? Now, open source community, basically, if we use the definition of a community, is basically communities for people who are interested in open source. But if you really look at it, it's an open community, not just for people who are interested in open source, but for people who want to excel in that field, who want to create change in that field, people who want to interact with other like minds. So if you really look at it, it's also getting people who are interested in that particular field. So now that we know what an open source community is, general terms basically, what are the things that you need to look out for? Remember, I said this is not just a talk. It's going to be an interactive session. So if at any point in time you have any issues, you have any questions, you have anything that you'd like to add, please feel free. I like my talks to be more of conversations than me just blotting things out. And the things to look out for before starting a community, this is like the most important thing. A lot of people these days feel just because everybody is having a community, or because there's like different communities here and there, you can easily just start one community and then that's the end. But there are specific things that you need to look out for, specific things that you need to watch out for, or work on before you decide to start a community. Now, things like, is there a specific need for that community? I'm going to use Open Source Community Africa as an example, Oscar. Before I said community, Nia and Samson had the idea of wanting to get more people in open source. How can he? Because he has a lot of interaction, a lot of contacts with open source developers or people in open source ecosystem across the globe, not within Africa, but the African ecosystem, African OSS space wasn't so out there. There are people who are into open source, but it's not there. There's no community, there's no platform. The communities that used to exist, there was no it felt archaic. It wasn't active, basically, it was inactive. And I wanted a platform where he can get to share his resources, his network. He can pull in international bodies, international organizations, and plug them into the African ecosystem. But we didn't have one. That's African OSS ecosystem. We didn't have one. And not just that, we also wanted to be able to grow contributions from African developers, and we will not be able to do that if we don't have a central platform where we know that we can always easily communicate with these people. It's like our home and things like that. So what I did was find out if there was a certain need, for this community. And also, sorry, please give me another minute.
All right, so we are going to give our guests an additional 1 or 2 minutes to attend to, virtual stuffs now. She's multitasking, which is one thing women are remarkably known for. All right, so I hope you're jotting down something. I actually have my pen and paper right here with me. And yeah, I think our guest is back. So I guess I will reserve my comments till she's done. Welcome back.
Yeah, super sorry for all that delay. Trying to like finalize a lot of things. Today is a very busy day for me, so sorry. But I think that's the last break I'm going to be taking.
Okay. Yeah, it's okay.
So as I was saying, the things to look out for when you're building a community, you have to look out for things like if there's a need, an actual need for a community. You might say, my talk is not just going to focus on open source communities. This particular part where you have things to look out for starting a community is going to focus more on general communities. You might want to have a community specifically for people who are into Laravel, is an example, right? But then within the space you are, the locality that you are there people who are working with Laravel? Are there people who are genuinely interested in Laravel? And yes, things have sort of changed or tilted to like a virtual world, and you can get people from literally from any part of the world plug into your events. But when you look really within your circle, within your network, are there genuine people who are interested in Laravel, or it's people who are outside your community that are attending your events? That's like one thing. Find out if there's a specific need for that community. Then two is define the goals of that community. If you don't have a specific goal for community, it will feel like you are running around in circles and you're just doing anything that either pleases you or anything that was what anything you feel like there's no actual goal, there's no aim. I'll use Oscar again as an example. Like I said, what we want to do, what we're planning to do, what we're currently doing with Oscar is that as Open Source Community Africa, is that we are not just trying to create a community for people who are into open source, but we also want to plug in external or international or foreign bodies, organizations, individuals in the ecosystem, the global ecosystem community to that of Africa as well. We want to then we want to connect African developers who are into the open source space with opportunities, with global opportunities as well. That's like the first goal, or that's the second goal. Then third goal is also to build a platform where people who have no idea about open source, people who are into open source, and etc., can come together, learn from each other, and improve on their various ways that they can give contributions. Example is what we're doing with this event here. So when you find out what your community really needs, like the things when you find out these things, it's a lot more easier for you to now finalize and conclude, okay, I think there's a need for my community to actually run. And then the first thing that I mentioned, find out if there's an actual need. That's like 90% of the work. It helps you with 90% of the work. Is as simple as, because if there's no actual need for your community to run, if no one is interested in what you're doing, it's going to be a lot more difficult for your work to actualize. It's going to be a lot more difficult for your goal to actualize, because you need people. You're people facing. You're not like those who are building products. Though you could be a software engineer, you could be a designer, you could be working with products, you could be building products, but then this time around, when it comes to community, you're community facing. And if there are no individuals, if there are no humans interested in what you're doing, it's just like products. If no one is interested in what you're building, no one will use it. It's the same thing as community. If no one is interested in what your community is about, it's as simple as saying your community is a facade, or it's not going to happen. So you need to find people who are interested in your community. And then how do you find people who are interested in your community? This brings it down to finding stakeholders in your community. I mean, in the DevRel world, we call these people stakeholders. That's people who have like final decisions or say, not really like final decisions, but they have a say in your community and what you do in your community. And it's as simple as the stakeholders. Like I said, there's no presentation. I have the notes like on my phone and I'm reading it from my phone. So you see my eyes moving up and down. But the stakeholders, when it comes to communities or ecosystem, I narrow them down to three in open source. In open source, the stakeholders, you have the contributors. Contributors are people who make the contribute code, the mocks and things like that. And then you have the maintainers, those who are actually working on the projects. Maintainers can also be contributors, but the project is theirs, or they have admin rights to that particular project. It's as simple as that. Then you also have the sustainers, those who chip in funds or financial resources into the community. Like I was explaining earlier on, all of these people build up that particular ecosystem. So when you bring it down to open source, those are like the keywords that you typically use. So the contributors, you hear things about contributing to open source, get started with open source and things like that. Or hey, come and contribute, or come and make your first contribution to open source, or things like that. Or would you like to contribute to this project I'm working on? Things like that. You're making contributors are people who do the technical work, the technical thinking, and all of that. Maintainers shuffle between contributors and project owners. They are sort of the brains or the brain house or thinking faculty behind that particular project. For a project to exist, for a project to run smoothly, when you make contributions to a code, there's somebody who tells you, okay, this doesn't follow our community guidelines, this doesn't follow our technical guidelines, or this is how you should do it. We don't use this type of license or things like that. Just like maintainers. And then sustainers, those ones, they don't do technical work, but they do things like fund projects, fund maintainers or sponsor maintainers, and things like that. Projects that they know are beneficial to the community, they sponsor it and they help out like financial resource basically. Now, when you find out who these key stakeholders are in your community, It's always okay, let me use design open source community as an example. Who are the contributors in the design open source community? This is like a question trained out to everyone. Who are the contributors in the design open source community? I'll give you a few minutes for answers to my question. Who are the contributors? When you bring it down to the design open source community, who are the contributors? Okay. Have I been talking to myself all along? I can see people are shy, so it's fine. Because of time, I'll just continue. But to answer the question that I asked, in a design community, basically, it's as simple as who are your contributors? They're designers, people who UI UX designers, graphic designers, people who create the design docs, people who make the design contributions. As simple as that. Now, moving on. Now that you've realized, you found out who the stakeholders are in your community, it's always advisable to create success metrics for your community. It's one thing to know, okay, your goal. It's one thing to know who your stakeholders are in your community. But if you don't have success metrics are sort of different from community goals, in the sense that community goals is like the last bus stop. It's the final pathway that you want to get to, or the final junction that you want to get to. But success metrics are the things that those pointers, those highlighters that will let you know if you're on the right path or if you're on the wrong path. So see it as you are traveling to a particular location, and location X is your final destination. And then every bus stop that you get to, the signboard on that bus stop is your success metrics that shows that you're on the right path. I would use, say, I'm currently in Lagos, Nigeria, so I would use an example in Lagos. If you're going from Ikeja to Lekki, and a good example is from Ikeja to Lekki. Lekki is your final destination. That's your community goal. And then all the bus stops that you stop at that shows you this is this location, this is this location before you get to Lekki are the success metrics that will tell you, oh yes, you're actually on your way to Lekki. Imagine if you're in a bus and you're meant to go to Lekki, but then your bus is taking you to somewhere like Badagry or somewhere else. Basically, it shows that you are on the wrong path. Basically, so you have to create success metrics to show that, okay, yes, you're doing the right thing or I'm doing the wrong thing. Success metrics like project growth. If you bring it down to open source communities, success metrics like project growth, you creating more projects, the projects that you have, people contributing to it more. Is it following guidelines that you set down? Is it inclusive? That's the project. Is it inclusive? Are people willing and happy to contribute to it? The feedback that you've gotten from it, are people excited about it, or things like that? Project growth, member growth as well. When people come into your community and in 2 years, 3 years, nothing has happened, that's a pointer to you that you're not doing the right thing. Remember, your community is meant to bring together people of like minds and to help them grow. A community is basically like a school, right? Say like a school, and not everyone who comes into your community would either come out on the other end. That's one thing. Two, not everyone who comes into your community has, or still like an investment, not everyone who comes into your community has the same goal. Three, not everyone who comes into your community would even get to the end. People will drop out. Like I said, it's a school. People will drop out. Some people would strive to the very end, but then it depends on the kind of things that you're putting out there. It depends on the kind of things that you want them to gain. It depends on the kind of things that you're using to engage them. So if your members are not growing It's a very huge point. I remember I said when it comes to building communities, you are people facing more than product facing. For product facing, it's a lot easier to, tweak this, tweak that, tweak this, and you achieve what you want. But when it comes to people, these are individuals, and you really cannot guarantee 100% that what you want is what everybody wants, or the goal that you want is what everybody wants to achieve. Is And I've learned this several times that you have to constantly check in with people, members in that community, to see if they are gaining what they came to that community to gain, and they are helping you attain that goal that you want to attain. So if your members are not growing, that's a huge pointer to you. And then how do you find out if your members are growing? It boils down to also inclusiveness and diversity as well. That's a huge thing. It's 2020. If you're building a community that's not diverse, if you're building a community that's not inclusive, it's a big pointer that you're not doing the right thing. And inclusiveness is not just for all. Diversity is not just for gender. They have diversity, race diversity, and different type of diversity. But the main thing is your community open to, when it's open source, is your community open to people who you really want, to the kind of stakeholders that you're really looking forward to? Is your community showing forth the goodness and encouraging more people externally to join? And then also, another success metric for your community is that you need to have a constant open feedback channel. That's another thing. Not closed feedback, open feedback channel, in the sense that anyone at any time, any member of the community can always reach out to you and say, oh, XY is happening. But I think we can always do ABC, or I think we can always do whatever it is. Are your community members comfortable enough to want to give you feedback? Like I said, it's people facing. And if you don't have a constant open feedback mechanism, your community is going to go downwards, because individuals, they're humans, right? And it's more like unpredictable. I won't use the word volatile, but it's very unpredictable. You might convince someone to join your community and say, oh, you're going to get the best, you're going to get this, you're going to get that. And maybe in 2 months' time or in a year's time, their own goal changes, and they want your community to still be help to them. But because, or maybe they veer off a particular track, but because your community is not open to taking feedback, that might help your community as well. When I'm talking about one person, it could be like a group of people, especially if a community is very large. One person's decisions or thoughts can also be the actions of several other people. So you always have to have that open feedback channel. Constantly check in, find out how your people are doing, that your community members are doing. Constantly check in and find out if everyone is on the right track, basically. Create that open feedback channel. Make your community members much more welcome to share their feedback, because just like you, individuals as well, and you are learning on the job. That's another thing about community building, because things are going to be you're dealing with humans, their thoughts, their decisions, their actions change over time. You also get to learn a lot of things over time, because then you have to keep reiterating and improving on several mechanisms that you're working on within your community. So I'm going to retrace the success metrics I just mentioned. The first thing is project and members growth. If the kind of projects, when it comes to open source, the kind of projects that you're putting on is not, it's not bringing in more people to want to contribute. It's not growing in the sense that, oh, more people are getting more excited about projects that you're working on, or it is not making impact within your community. That's one thing. Another thing is members growth. If your members come in and then there's really nothing to show that people are actually growing in your community, that's another thing to look out for. And then also you have to check out for inclusiveness and diversity as well. You want to make sure the community is open and welcome to everyone, because it's this open source. Your community is open and welcome to everyone, irrespective of gender, irrespective of religion, irrespective of race, irrespective of culture, whatever it is. And another thing is you want to create an open feedback channel constantly. Nothing is set or cast in stone. And then one mistake people make is, as community leaders or community builders, is they feel that because they are community leaders, they just set everything A, B, C, D, and that's how it is. Nobody can interfere, nobody can object, nobody can give feedback. Basically, that's another thing that people, another mistake basically that people make. You do not, as a community leader, you're actually a community servant. I don't know how to use the word servant, sounds somehow, but you're serving your community. It is what it is. You are putting the thoughts, the opinions, the actions, the concerns of your community ahead of yours. So if you say, as an example, you are at point A and you want to get to point B, and your community members say it might be a lot tougher with the path that you have laid down for us to get to point B. Why don't we try to take another path that'll still get us to point B? It might take longer. And if 90% of the community members are saying this, but you're like, no, I'm the community leader, it's this, and then that's the end. It's your fault. So now that you know that, now that you know the success metrics, how do you get started with your community? It's always simple. One big mistake that a lot of community leaders make or community builders make is that they feel once they start community and then just like emphasize about it, or put it out on social media, boom, it's gonna happen. No, it's not. Community building is one of the toughest things to do, actually. I'll keep reiterating this. You're working with humans, you're working with people. People have emotions, people have their ideology, people with different school of thoughts, people with different backgrounds, and some people might be slow learners or slow to evolve or things like that, and some people might be fast. Not everybody is going to move at the same pace. So you have to be very, very patient, which means you're literally starting from small. Even if maybe you are not the one who started the community, and maybe you're taking over, and because the community is big, your plans have to be like big. No, actually, whatever it is, you have to literally start small, start from the very basics, understand what these people want, understand the tone or tune that they're giving to you, and then grow from there. Because, like I said, communities are like platforms that people want to come together and just feel included, feel that they are being seen, feel that their voices are being heard, feel that they're not just members, that they're not just numbers to your progress reports or your annual reports, because they're actually humans. So when you start small, starting small is as simple as looking at the very basic, understanding what these people want and how you can help them grow. And just like that, it creates this ripple effect. Before you know it, the smaller things that you're doing would create that ripple effect, or ripple effect that would become something bigger. And before you know, your community is growing like that. A perfect example is what we're doing at She Could Africa and what we're doing with Oscar as well. And then when, aside starting small and growing big, is another thing you have to do is to get started with your community is for you to identify your stakeholders. Those stakeholders, without them, there's no community. Like I said, community is people facing, and the people are the stakeholders in your community. If you don't identify who the stakeholders are, it is going to be hard. So identify and constantly involve your stakeholders. It's as simple as that. By constantly involving them is there's a feedback mechanism, and then also putting them in thought process, putting them in leadership positions or things like that. Things that make them feel like I mentioned earlier, things that make them feel like, yes, they're not just numbers to your statistics reports. And then also have a code of conduct, because it's an open community, or it's like a community for open source. It is very, very easy. And like I said, I will keep emphasizing on this, because once people have that understanding that building communities is a lot different from building products. For communities, you're working with individuals, you're working with humans with different backgrounds, different ideologies. If you don't have a code of conduct that says, okay, in our community, we don't harass, in our community, we don't do this, in our community, we use open licenses or things like that. If you don't have one, things are going to be haywire in your community, because there's no rules, basically, but we don't like to call them rules, more like code of conduct. And then when you have a code of conduct, make sure that it's something that all your community members are aware of. The more you grow, the bigger your platform becomes, the more it is very, very important for you to have that code of conduct, because things could happen where maybe someone attend an event in your community and get harassed. And if there's no code of conduct, it's really hard for you to try to take out yourself from that equation, or for you to even try to defend the person who was harassed from the person or from the harasser, basically. Because there's no code of conduct that says, okay, in our community, it's a safe space, do not harass. If you're harassed, there's are punishments for things like that. And then another thing is, I've mentioned this earlier on, but it is very, very important when you start with your community. From day one, from the day and the very moment you choose to start a community, make sure that there's that feedback channel or that feedback mechanism. Make sure that there is one, create that open working feedback channel. And then also, you cannot have a community without a platform, because how else are you going to have your members gather together? How else do you want to share information or things like that? So you have to choose a platform that is going to be very suitable for your community. A very good example that you can build an open source community, or a platform that you can build an open source community, is Discord. A lot of open source communities use that. At Oscar, we use Discord because it's a lot easy to understand. It's also Slack, a different community platform that you can use. You might want to build your own unique or custom-made community platform, but it's always great to have a platform where everyone who is within that community, who has like interest in that community, can gather together and then interact or network with each other. You can also, within that community, create sub-communities where maybe people who are interested in JavaScript, like working on open source JavaScript projects, can meet together. Just make it like, see it like like I said, see like a school, and then in the school there are different departments, there are different faculties and things like that. Or for those who want it as a home, there are different rooms, and then you're like the landlord or the house owner. So when you create a community platform, then also create a resource platform, because you need resources to constantly help your community members grow. Like I said, community and member growth is another success metric for your community. If your members are not growing, then you need to look at yourself. So for you to want your members to grow, how do you help them grow? Create a resource platform. It could be on that same community platform. It could be via social media or anything like that. Maybe it could be via newsletters where you constantly keep pushing opportunities or resources to them. It could be via your social platform, where maybe on Twitter you're always tweeting or retweeting projects or things like that. And that way it's easier for your members to connect with you. Now here's one thing: not everyone wants to be a part of the community platform. They might be a part of a community, but they might not see the need to want to join the platform itself. So giving them other means to connect with you, to connect with your community, either via social media. I mean, we're in the era of social media, via social media, via different platforms, newsletters, email lists, mailing lists, or the rest. Just give them the opportunity to connect with you and feel included. Because if you just limit it to that platform, it's a lot easy for them to say, you know what, these people are just being biased. If it's not on the platform, they're not inclusive, or they don't care about every one of us. Or some people might not even have the resources to join your platform. So try as much as possible to be inclusive, like I mentioned. And when you do this, it's very easy you've literally set the pace about 50%, and then the rest is up to how constant you're engaging members to feedback. And then for the feedback, I'll keep emphasizing on feedback in community building. You need feedback, because people change, things change, and if you don't reiterate or if you don't build on the feedback they're giving you, it's something else. So it's one thing to get feedback, and it's another thing to actually implement the feedback that they're giving you. So if in your community you're always encouraging people to give you feedback, but you do not, maybe you're only doing it out of just to be formal or whatever it is, and you're not actually implementing the feedback that they're giving you, it's very easy for your members to say, you know what, our thoughts are not being rated here, let's just leave. So make sure that while you're collecting feedback, you're also implementing it, and your members can see that you're implementing that feedback. And I wish you all the very best in creating your community. So please, I'm open to taking in any questions that you might have on everything that I've just talked about. And if you would like to connect with me, unfortunately, I didn't do any slides for this because I wanted it to be an interactive talk and just share my experience about community building. If you'd like to possibly interact or engage with me further on, you can reach out to me on Twitter at Colocodes, and I'll be happy to take in your questions. From next year, I plan to have some sort of masterclass, even though I don't like to call it a masterclass, focus specifically on dev role and community building. So thank you, everyone, and Amara. Oh, I can see some comments. You can have a community without a platform. Community can exist in a vacuum. That's good. I'm open for comments, everyone.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Ada. It was an excellent, excellent rendition, or I don't know what to call it now. So please, if you have any question, Ada will be taking them in the next few minutes. So please, please, please ask your questions, or as she said, if you'd want to engage with her for further discussions around community development, feel free to reach out to her via Twitter at Colocodes. So thank you once again, Ada, for this session. And the tips shared here are not just applicable to building open source developer communities. Like, it's implementable in every other community you're building, whether design community or developer community or any community at all. The tips were very helpful. In fact, I feel I held my breath all through this session, but it's fine. All right, so in absence of any question, let's continue then. Some of you are shy, so you can always reach out to Ada with your questions. Thank you so much, Ada, once again for joining this session. We are very glad to have you. So thank you also to every one of you for joining this session today. And hold on, I think there's a chat here. Okay. Okay, I thought it was a question. Someone is thanking you. Okay, you all are thanking Ada. All right. Thank you all so much for thanking her. And with this, we are rounding up with our 3-day webinar on contributing to open source beyond code. And we've talked about how to contribute via design, via technical writing, and today via building open source communities. Okay, so, and of course, you saw during the session, you had something about funds. It's all part of it, right? So even if you can't build your own community, you can decide to be part of the sustainers with your cash, you know. So it's all part of it. So thank you so much, Ada, once again for joining, and thank you to every one of you for joining. Those that joined from day 1, those that joined from day 2, and those that joined today for the first time, you all are the MVPs. Thank you to all of you who have already started implementing what you learned. You are doing amazing. And yeah, a special thank you to all our guests for making our time to join us in these 3 days. And also thank you to Zainab Abubakar, who is our open source programs manager at Shecode Africa. She's the one that put this whole thing together. Thank you very much, Zainab, for giving us this opportunity to learn from experts in the field. So with this, we come to the end of this webinar. Yeah, stay blessed and do enjoy your holiday. Bye.